US sinks 6 Iranian vessels, launches Project Freedom to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran fires 15 missiles at the UAE Hormuz, shifts into direct confrontation. Israel maintains high readiness for a potential strike on Iran. Hezbollah rejects direct talks, as Iran's still not under enough pressure to concede. 17,000 US. Philippines troops hold drills as China responds sharply. On Monday, May 4, United States Central Command, CENTCOM, announced that Washington has begun supporting the restoration of commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most strategically critical maritime choke points. According to a statement posted on X, a U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer successfully escorted 2 U.S. flagged commercial vessels through the strait. The ships continued safely, marking an initial step toward restoring maritime traffic. This move is part of the Project Freedom initiative, announced by Donald Trump on Sunday, May 3, aimed at enabling vessels stranded in the Persian Gulf for more than a month to transit Hormuz safely. A senior official said the White House is seeking concrete actions to increase pressure on Iran, forcing Tehran to choose between allowing free navigation or risking military confrontation. At the same time, military tensions continue to escalate. On Monday, U.S. attack helicopters sank 6 Iranian small vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of CENTCOM, said the vessels posed a direct threat to commercial shipping and U.S. naval assets, including the destroyers USS Truxtun and USS Mason transiting the strait. The incident occurred on the very first day of Project Freedom. At the same time, the U.S. has deployed additional warships to protect neutral vessels stranded in the area. Admiral Cooper added that the strait has been cleared of mines, while U.S. forces, including fighter aircraft, helicopters, warships, and UAVs, are maintaining a continuous presence. The overall operation is expected to involve approximately 15,000 personnel and more than 100 aircraft. However, the security environment in Hormuz remains highly unstable. Neutral commercial vessels continue to face attacks near the strait. South Korean officials confirmed an explosion aboard the Panama-flagged vessel HMM Namu, which caused an engine room fire. The cause is under investigation, including the possibility of missile or naval mine involvement. A UAE oil tanker operated by ADNOC was also struck by 2 UAVs while transiting the strait, despite carrying no cargo. The British military reported that a UAE vessel was on fire near Mina Sakar port, while the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs called on Iran to halt the attacks and fully reopen Hormuz. While many countries have expressed frustration over Iran's blockade of the strait, Tehran has responded with a hardline stance, declaring that any vessel transiting Hormuz without Iranian authorization could be considered a target. Iran also warned that U.S. escort operations would be viewed as acts of aggression. An Iranian official further emphasized that any U.S. intervention in what Tehran calls the new maritime order in Hormuz would violate the ceasefire agreement. Iran has also claimed it fired 2 missiles at a U.S. warship, while sources linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps reported warning shots in the Gulf of Oman. However, CENTCOM rejected these claims and reaffirmed that the United States maintains full control of the Strait of Hormuz. In an interview on Fox News Monday morning, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent emphasized that Washington holds absolute control over Hormuz while criticizing Iran's naval forces. President Trump also warned that the U.S. military would respond forcefully if the maritime corridor were disrupted, signaling that Project Freedom is not just about restoring shipping, but also about expanding direct U.S. military presence in the region. Iran fires 15 missiles at the UAE Hormuz, shifts into direct confrontation. The situation in the Middle East continues to escalate, as the United Arab Emirates accused Iran of launching a large-scale attack on Monday, May 4, 2026, marking the first major escalation since the US-Iran ceasefire on April 7th. According to the UAE Ministry of Defense, its air defense systems intercepted an incoming wave consisting of 12 ballistic missiles, 3 cruise missiles, and 4 unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, for a total of 15 missiles and 4 drones deployed. While most were neutralized, the attack still left 3 people lightly injured, prompting the UAE to warn that this represents a serious escalation and to reaffirm its legitimate right to respond. Prior to the interceptions, the UAE issued emergency mobile alerts, instructing residents in key areas such as Dubai and Abu Dhabi to remain in safe locations. This suggests air defenses were activated early and responded immediately to incoming threats. Tensions did not stay confined to the air domain, but quickly spread to critical energy infrastructure. In Fujairah, an Iranian UAV is believed to have caused a fire at an oil facility, the endpoint of a pipeline designed to allow the UAE to bypass the Strait of Hormuz and reduce wartime risk. At the same time, the maritime front remains under strain. Earlier, at 1940 on May 3, the empty ADNOC tanker MV Baraka was struck by 2 UAVs while transiting the Strait of Hormuz, approximately 78 nautical miles north of Fujairah, though no casualties were reported. The UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs described the attack as an act of piracy by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, accusing Iran of using Hormuz as a tool of economic coercion and a direct threat to global energy flows. Regional reactions were swift. Egypt strongly condemned the attacks, stating they violate the principle of freedom of navigation under international law and pose serious risks to regional security, while the Gulf Cooperation Council also issued collective criticism. Cairo emphasized that the UAE's security is closely tied to its own national security and declared readiness to support any necessary measures taken by Abu Dhabi. More broadly, developments on the 4th of May show that the situation has shifted from a ceasefire posture to direct confrontation on an expanding scale. What began as sporadic maritime incidents has now spread to sovereign territory and critical energy infrastructure. Notably, this escalation coincides with the U.S. deployment of escort operations through Hormuz, significantly increasing the risk of direct confrontation between Washington and Tehran. In effect, the Strait of Hormuz is evolving from a strategic choke point into a conflict trigger, where each military action carries the potential to set off a wider chain reaction. Israel maintains high readiness for a potential strike on Iran. Amid escalating tensions in the Gulf, an Israeli military official stated that the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, remains at its highest level of alert. Both air defense systems and offensive capabilities are fully operational, and this posture has remained unchanged since the ceasefire took effect. At the same time, Donald Trump continued to issue strong warnings. In an interview with Fox News, he declared that if Iran were to attack any U.S. vessel around the Strait of Hormuz, it would be wiped off the face of the earth. However, Trump also noted that Iran appears to be showing a greater degree of flexibility in negotiations, particularly under pressure from the U.S. economic blockade campaign. The U.S. president emphasized that Washington is continuing to deploy forces and equipment to the region, while underscoring America's military superiority. "We have the best equipment, bases positioned around the world and always ready. We can use them if necessary." On Truth Social, Trump also accused Iran of targeting uninvolved countries, including a South Korean cargo vessel, while noting that no additional ships had been damaged while transiting Hormuz. He further suggested that Iran may have launched missiles toward the UAE during the day, and called on South Korea to join the US-led effort in the region. According to Trump, US forces have destroyed 7 Iranian fast boats in recent operations. Hezbollah rejects direct talks as Iran remains under insufficient pressure to concede. On the other side, Iran's regional proxy forces are also beginning to adjust their positions. Recent assessments suggest that Tehran is still not under enough pressure to alter its stance on the nuclear issue. In an interview with 103 FM, an Iran analyst noted that while there are emerging signals suggesting Tehran may be open to limited compromise, the negotiation process remains effectively stalled due to Iran's rigid conditions. According to Rams, a proposal believed to have originated from Iran is currently under discussion. However, Iranian officials themselves have acknowledged that the version released by a pro-Tehran outlet may not fully reflect the actual terms. Even so, the proposal suggests a degree of flexibility, including extending timelines on uranium enrichment restrictions, committing not to stockpile fissile material even if enrichment resumes in the future. Despite this, the core issue remains unchanged. Iran continues to refuse any discussion of its nuclear program until the war ends. This means that any concessions, if they occur, would only come after key preconditions are met, including an end to the war, the lifting of the blockade, a U.S. military withdrawal from the region. These conditions significantly reduce the likelihood of a diplomatic breakthrough. Rams question the feasibility of such a framework. If U.S. forces withdraw and the blockade is lifted first, there is no guarantee that Iran would then engage in serious negotiations. Drawing a comparison to Hamas in Gaza, he argued that a party only becomes genuinely willing to compromise when it agrees to negotiate without core preconditions, something Iran has yet to demonstrate. Another expert, Jim Townsend, assessed that Iran does not seek to prolong the war, but is still aiming to preserve a certain level of nuclear capability as a long-term strategic asset. This indicates that current measures are still insufficient to force a shift in Tehran's strategic posture. Despite heavy pressure from naval blockades, Iran appears willing to absorb economic costs without conceding on its nuclear position. According to energy experts, Iran could hold out for several more weeks, even in a scenario where oil production is halted for 1 to 1.5 months. However, this does not imply a rapid de-escalation. Analysts emphasize that a real turning point would only emerge if Iran agrees to enter nuclear negotiations without preconditions. If that happens, it would represent an unprecedented level of flexibility from Tehran. In a related development, Naim Qassem, Secretary General of Hezbollah, on Monday rejected the possibility of direct negotiations between Lebanon and Israel. He argued that direct dialogue would amount to a political concession benefiting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former U.S. President Donald Trump in the context of upcoming elections. According to Qassem, Hezbollah supports only indirect negotiation channels and warned that direct talks would not produce meaningful results. In his statement, Qassem accused Israel of violating the ceasefire more than 10,000 times, asserting that the current situation is not a ceasefire, but a state of continuous conflict. He stressed that Lebanon is the party under attack, and that any diplomatic solution must begin with an end to hostilities. At the same time, Hezbollah reaffirmed that it will not accept surrender or be forced into signing political military agreements under pressure. Overall, the picture is clear. Neither Iran nor its proxy forces, including Hezbollah, are ready to enter a substantive compromise. Tehran continues to hold firm on its preconditions, while Hezbollah rejects all forms of direct dialogue, a clear signal that diplomatic space remains effectively closed. In other words, this is not a negotiation phase yet, but a state of strategic deadlock, where each side continues to escalate pressure to improve its position. And as long as Iran's core conditions remain unchanged, the likelihood of a breakthrough stays extremely low, meaning regional tensions are unlikely to ease in the near term. 17,000 US, Philippines troops hold drills as China responds sharply. Notably, tensions in the Middle East are not unfolding in isolation, but are beginning to spill over into other strategic theaters, particularly the Indo-Pacific. The 2026 Balikatan exercise between the United States and the Philippines is emerging as a clear signal that Washington has shifted from rhetoric to concrete action in building alliances in the region. According to the Wall Street Journal, the exercise lasts nearly 2.5 weeks and brings together 17,000 U.S., contributes nearly 10,000 personnel, while Japan participates for the first time with 1,400 troops. Canada and New Zealand join as new participants, alongside a smaller contingent from France. In essence, this is no longer a routine exercise, but a test of multinational coordination under realistic conflict scenarios. Training activities focus on amphibious operations, artillery, mortars, light armored vehicles, and attack UAVs directly, reflecting potential contingencies in the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait. U.S. Major General James Barthelemy described it as a large-scale demonstration of firepower, indicating that combat readiness has reached a new level. China's response has been largely predictable. Beijing views these multilateral drills as provocative and has responded by conducting live-fire exercises and patrols near the Philippines. This follows a familiar pattern. Each step of U.S. alliance strengthening is met with a symmetrical military response from Beijing, increasing the risk of unintended clashes in the South China Sea. However, U.S. allies are now changing how they view regional risk. Where many countries previously sought to distance themselves from a potential Taiwan conflict scenario, they are now increasingly treating it as a shared security interest. Strategic assessments suggest that in the event of a conflict, the U.S. would rely on bases in the Philippines and Japan to support Taiwan, while Australia would play a logistical role. Any crisis involving Taiwan would likely draw in multiple countries across the region. Recent political statements reinforce this trend. Japanese leadership has warned of the possibility of forced deployment if Taiwan is attacked, while the Philippine president emphasized that with over 100,000 Filipino workers in Taiwan, the country would find it difficult to remain on the sidelines in the event of conflict. This signals a transition from passive observation to active contingency planning among regional allies. The exercise takes place as the U.S. balances force allocation between the Middle East and Asia, a dynamic that has previously raised concerns among allies about potential strategic overstretch. However, rather than pulling back, Washington is advancing a new model, burden sharing with allies. The increase in defense spending by Japan, Australia, South Korea, and even New Zealand suggests that this strategy is beginning to take effect. In practice, deployments such as the Typhoon air defense missile system in the Philippines, capable of striking strategic targets, demonstrate that the U.S. is moving beyond political commitments to forward-positioning deterrent capabilities. At the same time, exercises are becoming increasingly combat realistic rather than symbolic. Overall, Balikatan 2026 reflects a significant shift from a loose alliance framework to a coordinated deterrence structure with real operational integration. As tensions in the South China Sea and around Taiwan show no signs of easing, what is unfolding is no longer just military exercises, but preparation for a conflict scenario that more and more countries recognize they may not be able to stay out of. Which hotspot do you think will ignite next, the Strait of Hormuz or another front? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow for the latest updates.